being done quite deliberately at a fairly critical time for the system, because October is when payments restart. So for borrowers who for more than 3 years now have not had to be making their payments, they're now going to have to start doing that again. And this is all intended to be kind of a reset to make that transition easier. There's a few other things happening there as well. One of the big ones is that the administration said last week that for the first 12 months, borrowers who are late on their payments or fall behind on them and don't make them won't be reported to credit bureaus. So they're trying to kind of cushion the transition and soften the blow and give people time to get back to this idea of having this bill be part of their lives again.
And Stacey, given what happened to Biden's last big attempt to rein in student debt, the last big sweepy effort, how do we know that this part of the plan is actually going to happen?
It's an excellent question. On this one, the administration has said that they thought their authority to do this was crystal clear and that they would be surprised if there was legal challenges. And it is true that the law does give the Education Secretary the authority to design these repayment plans. The Education Secretary has been doing that for decades, and this does seem to be on firmer ground as something that is a typical act that the Education Department can go forth and do.
Stacey, as you're describing all these changes, it strikes me that they're a pretty big deal, right? But they don't have the emotional power of what we thought was going to happen, of getting rid of $20,000 of debt for a borrower overnight. And I guess I wonder if these changes, as impactful as they may be, will feel transformative to people on an individual level.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. The emotional element of this is going to be really challenging. The reality is that this will be a very different student loan system than it was before the pandemic. People's monthly bills are going to look very different. In many cases, they're going to be smaller. But we're also still going back to a world where after 3 years of having a $0 student loan payment, people are going to have to start once again paying hundreds or thousands of dollars a month on these debts. And there's no way for that to happen without it feeling pretty unpleasant for people.
Right.
And one of the upshots of the way this all played out was that people feel like something got snatched away. You know, people were promised this big debt relief, which would have been a big, exciting, very easy to understand thing. And instead, that's gone. And now we're left with going back into a more efficient, more affordable, but still ultimately, it's a debt collection system. So even though the world in October, as we re-enter these debt payments, is going to be better for a lot of people, it's still not necessarily going to feel better. For a lot of people, there's just going to be this heavy sense of, I once again have to pick up and start paying this big crushing debt.
Stacey, thank you so much.
Thanks, Natalie.
We'll be right back.
Major League Baseball has evolved over time, but this year's rule changes have really created something special. According to the New York Times, this much we know already. A whole lot of dead time is gone, and nobody wants it back. Clear the weeds from the garden, and the good stuff has more room to flourish. Quicker games, more action, more of what fans love about baseball. Visit any ballpark or go to MLB.com, and you'll see what everyone is talking about.
Here's what else you need to know today. On Thursday, Janet Yellen began a 4-day trip to China, her first to the country as Treasury Secretary. The visit will be a challenging act of economic diplomacy as Yellen attempts to ease years of distrust between the U.S. and China. Both countries have continued to erect new barriers to trade and investment, particularly after the U.S. began blocking China's access to sensitive technology, such as semiconductors, last year. And For the first time in 2 decades, the federal government gave an Alzheimer's drug full approval. The drug, Leqembi, has been shown to modestly slow cognitive decline in the early stages of the disease, and Medicare, the federal health insurance program for older Americans, said it would cover much of its high cost, laying the foundation for the drug's widespread use. Data from a large clinical trial showed that the drug may slow decline by about 5 months over an 18-month period for people with mild symptoms, but that it also carries significant safety risks. Today's episode was produced by Claire Tennisketter, Will Reed, and Mary Wilson. It was edited by Devin Taylor and Mark George, with help from Lisa Chow. Contains original music by Marian Lozano and Rowan Nemisto, and was engineered by Chris Wood. Our theme music is by Jim Brunberg and Ben Lansberg of Wonderly. The Daily is made by Rachel Quester, Lindsay Garrison, Claire Tennisketter, Paige Cowett, Michael Simon Johnson, Brad Fisher, Chris Wood, Jessica Chung, Stella Tan, Alexandra Lee Young, Lisa Chow, Eric Krupke, Mark George, Luke Vanderploeg, MJ Davis-Lynn, Dan Powell, Sydney Harper, Michael Benoit, Liz O. Balin, Asta Chaturvedi, Rochelle Banja, Diana Wen, Marian Lozano, Corey Schreppel, Rob Zipko, Alicia Itub, Mooj Zaidi, Patricia Willens, Rowan Nemisto, Jody Becker, Ricky Novetsky, John Ketchum, Nina Feldman, Will Reed, Carlos Prieto, Ben Calhoun, Susan Lee, Lexi Diao, Mary Wilson, Alex Stern, Dan Farrell, Sophia Landman, Shannon Lynn, Diane Wong, Devin Taylor, Alyssa Moxley, and Summer Tamad. Special thanks to Sam Dolnick, Paula Schumann, Lisa Tobin, Larissa Anderson, Julia Simon, Sophia Milan, Mahima Chablani, Des Ibaqua, Elizabeth Davis Moorer, Jeffrey Miranda, Renan Borelli, Maddie Messiello, Isabella Anderson, and Nina Lassam. That's it for The Daily. I'm Natalie Kitroev. See you on Monday.
When the whole family comes together to watch the game, nobody wants to miss a second of the action to run to the grocery store. With Instacart, you can get all your weekly groceries in as fast as an hour. Less time shopping means more game time. Let's go! Visit instacart.com to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. $10 minimum per order. Additional terms apply.
Good morning. Welcome to Axios Today. It's Friday, July 7th. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Today on the show, green energy helps keep Texas electricity costs low. Plus, what next week's NATO summit could mean for the war in Ukraine. But first, the politics of social media. Our weekly state of play is our one big thing. This week, a federal judge temporarily restricted the Biden administration's communication with social media platforms. The ruling is a response to a lawsuit filed by the Republican Attorneys General of Missouri and Louisiana, alleging the administration pushed social media companies to censor Americans' freedom of speech. For our Friday State of Play, Axios' Sarah Fisher is here with the big picture. Sarah, first, what do we need to know about this ruling in terms of what exactly it prohibits or stops Biden officials from doing?
Basically, it's saying that Biden administration officials shouldn't be communicating with social media platforms. And the reason that they're arguing that is because there have been instances in the past few years, if you think about the pandemic, if you think about elections, where officials from the government have had to work with tech platforms to ensure that things like voter fraud, misinformation weren't proliferating. The data that tech platforms are going to rely on is not necessarily going to just come from their own research and monitoring. They're going to work with the government to see if they're finding anything suspicious, and then they can limit it on their platform. So I think that what this ruling is trying to say is that the government has overstepped its bounds in its requests for what social media platforms don't or do elevate. But the challenge here, Nyla, is if you go too broad, you could potentially limit communications from
misinformation was considered a victory for the GOP. What does this tell us about Republicans' greatest fears about social media?
I mean, they've been saying for months that they think that the government has been colluding with social media to sort of censor their viewpoints. Even at the turn of this new Congress, that was one of the first priorities that the GOP said that they wanted to tackle, was finding out whether there was some sort of collusion relationship between the government and social media. Now, there's been very little proof of this. I know that the Biden administration, of course, has tried to pressure social media companies around things like misinformation, etc. But it's likely in the appeal process, we're going to find out a lot more about what the communication between the government and social platforms has looked like over the years.
The Biden administration is appealing this court ruling. When we're talking about the Republican sensibility about social media, where do Democrats fall?
So Democrats have always thought that social media doesn't do enough to police misinformation, while Republicans think that they go too far. So obviously, Democrats are outraged by this decision. And now I also want to acknowledge that some of the communications between the government and tech platforms continued and happened during the Trump administration, because they were also experiencing the similar types of public health, public safety, and national security crises that you experience in the Democratic administration. Again, things like election meddling, terrorism, etc. So Democrats largely think that the government and tech platforms should be working together. Do I think that they think there should be an inappropriate level of coordination? No, but I don't think they think it's existing the way that Republicans assume it is.
So what effect might this be having right now on misinformation or disinformation around different political campaigns?
Tech platform executives that I've spoken to in the past 24 hours think that this could have a chilling effect on their ability to work with the government. Because when you think about things like election meddling and misinformation, those are issues that security departments, think about the FBI, think about the DHS, work in tandem and have for years with tech platforms to ensure that we're combating that in real time. And so ahead of the election, if that relationship gets severed, that could be a big deal.
Sarah Fisher is Axios' senior media reporter. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Nyla.
And in some light political news, younger 2024 presidential candidates have been lately showing off their athletic abilities. Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, who's 37, has incorporated tennis into his campaign schedule, hosting events like Tennis with Vivek. A recent video of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. doing push-ups shirtless went viral. He's 69 and running in the Democratic primary. And a super PAC aligned with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, age 44, mailed out baseball cards featuring DeSantis highlighting his stint in the Little League World Series. Axios' Sophia Kai writes, these candidates likely want to show voters they're in better physical and maybe mental shape than frontrunners Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Biden is currently 80 years old and Trump is 77. In a moment, looking ahead to next week's NATO summit.
The Last Archive is a show about the history of truth in America. Each episode, we tell a story about people coming up with some new way of understanding the world. Histories of science, technology, democracy. This season, we've got stories on everything from mid-century songwriting machines to social network theory, and plenty of mad inventors.
Of course I go, oh my god. Well, it's Dr. Frankenstein's monster, isn't it?
Listen to The Last Archive wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Axios Today. I'm Nyla Boodoo. World leaders are gathering in Vilnius, Lithuania for NATO's annual summit next week. The meeting comes just after the war in Ukraine will hit its 500-day mark, but there's more on the docket too. Axios' senior world reporter Dave Lawler is here with more. Hey Dave.
Hi Nyla.
I mentioned Ukraine, which isn't yet a NATO member. How much will that be dominating the conversation?
Yeah, so that is the big issue, Nyla, how they navigate this question of Ukraine's future membership in NATO and also what they do in the interim while Ukraine is not a member of NATO. There are members of the alliance, particularly in Eastern Europe, countries like Poland, that want very strong guarantees for Ukraine that they will be in NATO. Of course, there's the complicating factor that if you invite Ukraine into NATO now, you're basically signing up for war with Russia, because there's a security guarantee if a country comes under attack, the allies will defend it. The US has been one of the more reluctant countries in terms of the timeline of Ukraine getting into NATO. They want something that's more along the lines of Ukraine is making progress towards membership. We'll continue to arm them as long as it takes, but the U.S. does not want a direct timeline for, okay, here's when and how Ukraine will get into NATO, because there's concern that if you say Ukraine gets in after the war, Russia has an extra incentive to keep the war going. So it's a very difficult issue for them to try to unpack next week.
For months, NATO hoped this summit would be an opportunity to welcome its newest member, Sweden. Is that still looking likely?
Sweden is not going to get in before the summit kicks off. They've basically run out of time for both Hungary and Turkey, who are the holdouts here, to ratify Sweden's membership. There's hope that there may be some sort of announcement of an agreement at the summit, with Hungary and Turkey then taking action after the fact. But yeah, the hope that this would be a welcome party for Sweden does not look likely to come to pass next week.
So Dave, what else are you going to be watching for next week in Lithuania?
Well, these leaders are gathering in Lithuania. Ukraine is going to continue to be pushing this counteroffensive inside Russia. It's going a bit slower than some of the NATO countries had hoped. And Ukraine is saying, well, if you want us to move faster, we need more supplies, including cluster munitions, which are a particularly controversial form of armament, but one that Biden looks likely to approve. They're trying to continue to send signals that they're going to help Ukraine take back this territory, separate and apart from the idea of when Ukraine will get into NATO.
That's Axios' Dave Lawler. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Nyla.
This past Monday and Tuesday marked new records for the Earth's hottest days, according to NOAA data. And in Texas, the ongoing heat wave is still testing the electrical grid. But some good news. Renewables like solar and wind are generating big savings for customers and utilities in the state. Axios Austin's Asher Price is here with more. Asher, what are those savings looking like for folks in Texas?
The big thing is that these energy bills are not going to go through the roof. So price for what's known as a megawatt hour of electricity is sort of bouncing between $30 and $50, even as air conditioners are humming relentlessly through the summer. And those energy prices aren't spiking into, the $1,000 range.
Asher, you recently reported that the success of these renewables is actually in spite of little to no help from Governor Abbott. Why is that?
I think Governor Abbott is closely aligned with oil interests in Texas, and the renewable energy industry has gotten big enough that they present a threat to oil and gas interests, as well as other fossil fuels like coal and natural gas. Just 2 decades ago, renewable energy produced maybe 1% of electricity on the grid in Texas, and now last year it was about 26%. So you're seeing pushback from those interests, and Governor Abbott, in fact, earlier this year vowed to exclude renewable energy from some important incentive packages that Texas has. And in fact, lawmakers followed his lead this legislative session.
Asher Price is one of the authors of our Axios Austin newsletter. Thanks, Asher.
Thank you.
That's it for us this week. Axios Today is produced by Fonda Mwangi, Lydia McMullen-Laird, and Robin Lynn, with senior sound engineer Alex Sugiura. Alexandra Boti is our supervising producer. Asia Whitaker-Moore is Axios' executive editor, and Sarah Kaylani Gu is Axios' editor-in-chief. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Stay safe, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.
In 1968, Americans were introduced to something new.
This is 60 Minutes. It's a kind of a magazine for television.
5 decades later, 60 Minutes is America's most watched news program.
You believe this is the toughest challenge humanity has ever faced?
Absolutely. But if you miss the TV broadcast, you can listen to full episodes as a podcast.
That's really clever.
60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS, and available anytime wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, it's Phoebe. I want to tell you about something new that we're doing here at Criminal. Something we think you might like. It's called Criminal Plus, and it's our new membership program. Criminal Plus members will get to listen to Criminal without any ads. You can also listen ad-free to our other shows, This Is Love and Phoebe Reads a Mystery. Each month, we'll also bring you special behind-the-scenes bonus content, off-the-cuff conversations with me and the very talented people who make this show.